So it's been a bit of a while since we all convened due to the COVID-19 challenges. Once again, as our English division press correspondents, I would like to welcome you to the new media studio where we'll be holding our press briefings hereforth. The purpose of today's press briefing is to update you on current issues, and I am joined by the Attorney General as well to provide us with updates with regards to issues on the rule of law. But before we get into rule of law areas, I'm going to give you a bit of a perspective in terms of other current issues as well. And I would like to start with a broader overview, considering that we are in the new year, according to the Ethiopian calendar. There's some reflection processes that I would like to go through a little bit just to give us an indication of what were the successes and the milestones that had been achieved in the previous year. So some of the notable milestones as part of the reforms process that have occurred over the past year, and which I would like to particularly draw attention in that regard. One of the key aspects was also the merger of political parties, and the significance of that was bringing in political parties that were for a very long time on the periphery into the center as well. So the dynamism that is introduced by bringing periphery parties to the center and what it means for the ideals of building a multi-democratic platform and widening the political space is something to take note of as well. Another key milestone that we have scored as a nation over the past year is the launching of Ethiopia's first satellite into space. This is not something that should be taken in minute detail, but is something that is part of Ethiopia's prosperity ambitions, particularly in terms of technological innovation and excellence. Another key thing that had happened over the past year or within the Ethiopian calendar is the notable win of the Nobel Peace Prize, and I say this not only locating it within the Prime Minister's Nobel Peace Prize, but as a recognition for Ethiopia on the global stage and as a recognition for Africa as well, because it's a national victory altogether as well. Another component is the first stage filling of the Renaissance Dam. As we all know, the Renaissance Dam has been a key project, national project that has mobilized millions across the country as well. And in that regard, the relevance to the country, the relevance to the region as well, particularly in achieving this key milestone, is something that demonstrated national unity and that demonstrated the ability of Ethiopians to come together and show that they can meet goals that they have set together. Another example as well is the first launch of the first Green Legacy Initiative. It happened a little bit over the previous year, but there is an overlap with the Green Legacy Initiative success rate that had been achieved with regards to survival rate of the ones that we had planted in the previous year, as well as the successful completion of the set target for this year as well. Similarly, a key other notable milestone was the initiation and the completion of the Shaggar Park's Friendship Square, which we recently were able to observe. But also within the same year, Unity Park as well was a key project. And I don't necessarily bring them up as just project components, but these projects were able to demonstrate that, again, as part of the administration's reform activities with regards to initiating and completing projects in a timely fashion. These are demonstratable aspects of this capacity as well. So this is one key milestone as well that I would like to draw your attention to. With regards to illicit financial flows, illegal transfer of weapons, and human trafficking, there's been a lot of work that has been done over the past year as well within the security sector. So there's been a noticeable, as we've witnessed over the past year, a lot of announcements in terms of these illicit financial flows that have been brought into light, as well as weapons that were being smuggled into the country that have also been seized. So this shows that there's coordinated efforts among regional actors and federal actors in terms of bringing perpetrators into account with regards to this area. Agriculture productivity is also something that had shown an increase over the past year. We also moved to another milestone, which is the first digital strategy for Ethiopia, which was endorsed by the Council of Ministers. And this is quite a key milestone for Ethiopia. because of one of the key pillars that had been announced for this administration as part of the homegrown economic reform agenda is technology. Technology is a key pillar. So the digital strategy also feeds into that and is an enabling strategy for Ethiopia's ambitions with regards to digitizing. Ease of doing business, particularly the enabling of online services portal that has been operational to automate the process of business license registration and other similar services, modernizing the tax payment system and digitizing it as well for taxpayers to be able to pay online, particularly in Addis Ababa, is one other critical milestone. Similarly, in encouraging economic growth had also been registered in the first quarter of the year, albeit the impact of COVID-19 that came on a little bit later. Related to COVID-19, Ethiopia had also made remarkable positioned itself within the continent, championing collective leadership, particularly calling upon neighboring member states, calling upon other continental states as well to embrace the value of collective leadership, particularly in confronting COVID-19 challenges, as it's not a solitary or a siloed attack, a health crisis, but something that impacts all of us as well. So Ethiopia had championed this collective leadership aspect and was also through its utilizing Addis Ababa Bole Airport as a hub, utilizing the airline services, and through partnerships that had been gained through the Jackma Foundation, was also critical in disseminating life-saving materials and supplies to the rest of the continent as well. With regards to diplomacy, particularly as it relates to our citizens, citizen-centered diplomacy has been a key component of supporting citizens in other parts of the world who want to come back to the country to repatriate. And in particular, since the onset of COVID-19, particularly around March 2020, 4,211 citizens have been repatriated from Saudi Arabia, 1,195 from Lebanon, 1,023 from Kuwait, and other countries including Sudan, Qatar, totaling around 32,000 individuals that have been repatriated in these efforts. With regards to another key milestone in job creation targets, of the 3 million national target that had been set in the past year, the Jobs Commission had reported up to 3.3 million jobs had been created nationally, particularly in agriculture, industry, and service sector. And despite fears that COVID-19 would heavily affect the jobs creation component or create quite a huge dent, they also reported that only around 330,000 jobs were affected. So key contributing factors for this critical milestone in achieving the jobs creation component has been attributed to private sector participation, or the push to open up the space for private sector to participate, large-scale government projects as well, and the focus on enterprise development and sectoral financing support. Having laid this broader framework for what were some of the key milestones that we achieved over the past year, just to give you a perspective of where we are right now with regards to the COVID-19 status, particularly because it has not only affected Ethiopia, but it has affected a lot of things globally. Since the first identified case of COVID-19 within the country, the government had been taking various measures, as you've been following, to curb the spread and impact of the pandemic nationally. I had already initiated, or I had already shared with you earlier what had been done as part of collective leadership. But I also want us to recall a little bit in terms of the uncertainty that had prevailed, not nationally only, but globally, in terms of what the impact of COVID-19 was. It was as a new virus. Nobody knew what the spread looked like. Nobody at that point knew what were the factors surrounding it, what kind of measures needed to be taken to actually curb it. So it was a learning process for nations all around the world. So this was this was kind of the prevailing environment at that point in time, and fear was a guiding factor for a lot of countries. Many were overwhelmed by this uncertainty, And particularly for Ethiopia, one of the challenges related to COVID-19 and the fear around that was, as a developing country with a weak healthcare system, not knowing what the influx would mean for a weak healthcare system was one of the key considerations in terms of the measures that had been taken subsequently. Also, the impact on the economy was something that at a global level was steering a lot of waves. So at the same time, there were concerns as well what that would mean for an economy that over the past 2.5 years had started to progress as well. So this is to say that a lot of government energy and focus over those few months had been diverted to understanding this new challenge in the same manner that the rest of the world was understanding this new challenge, making the necessary preparations for extreme eventualities, and also implementing accordingly. And as you would recall, in this regard, a 5-month state of emergency was put into place, and various measures and directives were also put in place to prevent the spread and the kind of guessed devastation that this virus would have. And I would also like to again recall that Ethiopia, particularly for the measures that had been taken in curbing the spread of COVID-19, has been internationally lauded as part of best practices for the measures that had been taken. One of the critical milestones, particularly in the work that the nation has done and the government has done in curbing COVID-19, is related to the setup of laboratories throughout the country. If you would recall, when the first case was announced within the country, we would take samples and it would be taken to another country and would take about a 7-day turnaround time. So from that particular incident or particular way of handling testing within testing for COVID-19 to setting up to 54 labs nationwide and being able to generate results in 24 hours. This is also a demonstration of the capacity to be able to respond adequately to COVID-19. In the same manner, just about 2 weeks ago, with the partnership of an international company, testing kits production has also begun within the country as well. Similarly, as I'm sure you've taken note as well through subcommittees, there was a national committee that was being chaired by the Prime Minister with regards to following up on the COVID-19 pandemic spread. These subcommittees were also divided and doing various tasks, including setting up within a very short turnaround time quarantine, isolation, and treatment centers, and equipping them with the necessary materials to the support of partners around the world, but at the same time also through national procurement processes as well. So as it stands right now, according to Ministry of Health reports, the status of COVID-19 spread within the country has spread throughout all of the regions, zones, and more than 900 waradas at this moment as well. Based on yesterday's tally of reports, COVID cases are at 71,083, and the death toll totaling 1,141 as well. In the last month, the state of emergency and national test. In the last month of the state of emergency, which came to an end with the end of the Nahase month according to the Ethiopian calendar, a national testing campaign had been launched, and part of this broad national testing campaign was to give a perspective or inform government decision in terms of measures that need to be taken after getting a sense of what this virus spread looks like within the country, given the national context as well. So testing was doubled, and the doubling of this testing has achieved a lot of key insights for responses. Before the testing campaign, total number of positive cases had been at 20,000, and within that 1 month it had been doubled had been increased by twice that amount as well. So while COVID-19 still remains a global health threat, and considering that this threat will stay with us for a while, and this is according to WHO reports, that this is something that's going to be staying with us for a while vaccines are in the process of being found. And considering that we are at a much better readiness level for eventualities than we were a few months ago as a nation, the Ministry of Health, as you would note, had made recommendations to the House of People's Representative making suggestions for number one, easing of COVID restrictions based on spread patterns. So this is going to be dependent on the spread pattern from place to place. Addis Ababa so far is the highest concentration of COVID cases as well. So these easing of COVID restrictions are going to be guided by protocols that are going to be enacted by the Ministry of Health. They have also made recommendations for the reopening of schools. And also made recommendations for permitting activities that require gatherings by putting stringent prevention protocols in place. And one of the other key recommendations that they have also made is for the national elections to also continue by putting in place, again, stringent COVID-19 prevention guidelines and protocols as well. So I believe over the past 2 days, the House of People's Representative has also endorsed these recommendations, particularly with the holding of the much anticipated national elections. So if giving you the context of COVID-19, moving to the second agenda item, we move to a brief overview of peace and security within the country. And again, assessing the peace and security situation of the country, particularly in comparison to events and activities of the previous year. It can be said the overall picture is stable, particularly in comparison, as I said, with the previous year. Relevant federal entities use various indicators to determine the level of peace and security, and utilizing that, the reports that they have is that there is a majority of stability. But this is not to deny that there are sporadic incidents and pockets in which fatal incidents have also flared up as well. And these are obviously due to the instigation of anti-peace elements, as has been shared before as well, and for which commensurate actions have been taken by the federal government and also in collaboration with the relevant regional governments as well. I would like to also reiterate here that the government highly condemns all violent acts that are causing civilian fatalities, harm, and destruction. But also beyond condemnation, the federal government has also been taking commensurate actions in that regard. In particular, the recent attack on innocent civilians in Metakal is an egregious act, and again, the federal government heavily condemns it and also expresses condolences to the families of those that have lost their lives. Considering what a large country Ethiopia is, the broader perspective, as I had shared with you, is of relative stability, and we're not looking at incidents in these particular locales to give us that whole perspective. Particularly within the past few months, and Dr. Gedion will expound a little bit much more in terms of what has been done, particularly on the rule of law, but there's been strengthened efforts to ensure the rule of law, and security reforms underway have also been adapting and responding to the dynamism of the circumstances and the events that are happening. Again, saying this though, I want to reiterate, and we should not forget that sustainable peace, particularly, or a critical component to sustainable peace are communities themselves as well. So under the auspices of the Ministry of Peace, various initiatives have been put into place in different parts of the country, community policing mechanisms in which the community themselves are at the center and the heart of also ensuring the peace of their communities has been part of that. The community dialogues have been forged, and this is something that's ongoing under the purview of the Ministry of Peace. Moving on to the fourth agenda item, particularly responding to the issue of natural disasters. As we have all observed over the past few months, Ethiopia has been experiencing above season average rainfall, which has led to natural disasters in 5 regions of the country. This heavy rain-induced flooding and landslides have caused a lot of damage on property, loss of livelihoods as well, and displaced many people. Thankfully, no lives have been lost as a result, as far as reports that we have received. Due to these unprecedented rains, it has been reported that 43 waradas in 22 zones and 5 regions have been affected by flooding related to heavy rains. Yet there has been a lot of work that has been undertaken in collaboration with the federal government and the relevant or the affected regions to be able to respond in a timely manner and ensure that no lives were lost, despite the fact that property and livelihoods as part of that have also been affected. Although this year's rain exceeded expectations, I'm sure you would be wondering what were the precautionary measures that had been done before. Was it not expected? Natural disasters like this do not have a tendency of giving us an appointment in terms of when they will occur, but the federal government together with regions had been in preparation for, based on weather forecast, setting up dikes in areas where dikes were not existent before, but also fortifying and strengthening existing dikes as well. Nevertheless, again, because of the high amount of flooding, the high level of rains than had been expected, all of these damages were caused because of trespassing of these dikes. So early preparation work had also been done in anticipation, particularly in terms of making food and non-food items proximate and decentralized, whereas before the disaster risk and management entity would have deployed after such a situation occurs, just in anticipation of what these rains or heavy rains could have done. They had already started decentralizing it, and it is as a result that they were able to quickly be able to meet the needs of affected communities. The National Defense Forces and federal regional governments, as I had mentioned, had also been coordinating relief efforts, and once the floods have receded, there is going to be also follow-up work in terms of reinstating affected communities back into their locales. Before we move to the rule of law of components, just one of the key highlights that I also want to share is regards to the call or the new initiative that has been called upon by the Prime Minister, which is the Dine for Ethiopia. And this is related to some of the key milestones that I had shared for you. So in sharing this perspective with you, it's not really just about a dinner, but this is sort of an exercise in which all members of the country at all levels have been invited by the Prime Minister to participate in enabling similar kind of projects that had been undertaken that have an economic value, that are positioning Ethiopia as a key touristic destination, that are also creating jobs and mobilizing the service economies as well as different sectors as part of this mobilization. So the Dine for Ethiopia initiative is aimed at mobilizing resources for the development of 3 projects that have been stated in the Amhara region, the Oromia region, and the Southern Regional State, with the hope that similar kind of lessons that we have learned from the urban city projects would go national or would go regional as well, and be able to create opportunities by tapping into untapped resources that we've held on to. So the aim is to raise 3 billion and also match it with the 3 billion through goodwill support or other forms of support as well, and allocation of 2 billion for each of the project sites. And this is considered a national legacy project in the sense that there are various tiers in which all levels of the community will be able to participate. And in this regard, different accounts have been set up towards that. So I just wanted to make this brief announcement again. But in concluding my section, before we head off to the rule of law part, I just want to reiterate again that the government is at the highest level, at the executive level, committed to the reforms journey started. There are speculations that have been being spun around at various intervals that some of the incidents that have occurred over the past few months may have derailed the reforms process. That is absolutely not true and very far from the reality and the commitment of the federal government, particularly at the Prime Minister's level, because the reforms journey is a very multi-dimensional journey. It cuts across many components as well. And I also want to reiterate here that it's really important to understand the nature of reforms as well, in that they are deep, they will take time, and they are multi-dimensional. So in that sense, it is cumbersome, because established systems have to be shifted, structures and entrenched attitudes all take a long amount of time. So regardless of the occasional incidents that do happen, the general perspective with regards to the administration is commitment to the reforms track that has been started, particularly in the democratization journey of it. So with this, I will conclude my section, and then I invite Dr. Gedion to brief us on the rule of law, and then we'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my briefing will focus upon law enforcement efforts that have been undertaken in the past 3 months. So as you all know, on June 29, 2020, the renowned singer and artist Hachalu Hundessa was assassinated in Addis Ababa. In the immediate aftermath of his days and assassination, there was a breakdown of law and order in some parts of the country, particularly in some parts of Addis Ababa and in some zones within the Oromia regional states. There are riots and targeted attacks that singled out minorities in some parts of the Oromia regional state. These attacks and riots have had a devastating impact on the victims, and the communities that have been affected by these attacks are still reeling from the effects of the attack. As a result of these attacks, more than 160 individuals have died, and around 360 individuals have been injured, and the destruction of property is estimated to be around 4.6 billion Ethiopian birr. So after these incidents, there has been a coordinated law enforcement effort. The law enforcement efforts focused on 3 aspects. One focus of the law enforcement effort was on the assassination of artist Hachalu Hundessa. The second focus of the law enforcement effort was the violence that has occurred in some parts of the Oromia regional state. And the third focus of the investigations and the law enforcement effort was the violence that has occurred in Addis Ababa. In all focus areas of the investigation, we have been able, in a coordinated manner, to conduct the investigation, apprehend suspects, and bring charge against the suspects. The law enforcement effort was a coordinated effort between the Addis Ababa Police, the Oromia Regional State Police, the Federal Police, as well as the Oromia Regional State Attorney General's Office and the Federal Attorney General's offices. Because the crimes that have been committed that I have referred to earlier fall in different jurisdiction levels, some of the investigations and prosecution has to be done by the regional law enforcement agencies, and some of the matters have to be handled by the federal law enforcement agencies. So there has been an effort to coordinate our work, and we have managed to conclude our investigation and bring charges against most of the suspects. So in this effort, what has been accomplished so far is that in relation to the violence that has occurred in the Oromia regional state, more than 2,000 suspects have been brought to justice. Charges have already been opened, charges are already being pressed in various parts of Oromia at the regional courts. Furthermore, in relation to the assassination of Hachalu Hundessa, the suspects who were responsible for this heinous crime have already been identified, and they are being brought to justice. In relation to those who have instigated, incited, and directed the violence and riots both in Oromia and Addis Ababa, the suspects have been apprehended, and the investigations have been concluded, and charges have already been pressed. In some of these cases, in addition to the usual investigation process, there are also preliminary hearings before the actual trial commenced, and all of this process, the investigation, the pre-trial hearing, and at the commencement of the actual trial, the pressing of charge, has taken around 3 months. So most of July was spent on conducting the investigation. Pre-trial hearings were conducted mostly in August and early September, and by September we have already pressed charges. So we are of the opinion that compared to previous track records, we have made some progress in speeding up things and in bringing suspects to justice in a rather quick manner. And compared to the scale and magnitude of the crimes that have been committed, compared with their complexity and the limited resources we had, we are of the opinion that this is an accomplishment worth noting. At the same time, this effort has not been without challenge. As I have already pointed out, the scale and magnitude of the crimes that have been committed was enormous. And this has stretched the resources we have both at a regional and federal level. So the scale of the crimes by and in itself was a huge challenge. Furthermore, both at the federal and regional level, we have very limited resources, and this is something that we have to do alongside our other day-to-day ordinary law enforcement duties. This was not something we planned for or something we could have prepared for, so that was also a challenge. The other challenge we have faced in this law enforcement effort was the fact that we are still in a process of transition and in a reform process. We are still undertaking institutional reforms. We are, I would say, in the midst or in the first half of our reform process. So this presents its own challenge because we have institutions and personnel and systems that are in the process of reform as opposed to being already reformed. That has meant that along the way we have faced some challenge, and there have been instances and incidents in which we could have done a better job. So there were challenges, but despite the challenge, I think it was a successful effort in upholding rule of law and enforcing the law. So by way of starter and as a background, I think I would stop here, and then I'll try to elaborate on these points through the question and answer sessions.
Gedion, we can open it up for questions, particularly contained within the briefing points. Just as a matter of how we can do it, we'll take 2 questions from each reporter, and we'll see if we need another round. Please keep it short, and if you can at best address it to either one of us so we'd have clarity in terms of our response, would be great. Okay, so we'll take Robbie, Brooke, Grum, and then Simon over here for the first round.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I'm Robbie with Agence France Presse. As you know, more than 9,000 people were taken into custody in the aftermath of Mr. Hachalu's assassination. How many of those people are still in custody? And what is your response to allegations from Human Rights Watch and other organizations that the investigation process was marred by serious due process violations, people being rearrested, violation of bail orders, that sort of thing? And related to that, Mr. Jawar Mohammed was in court today saying that the case against him is politicized, and this is an attempt by the government to put him behind bars so that he cannot run in elections. What is your response to that? My second question is for Billene. You mentioned the violence in Metakel zone. What has the government been able to confirm about the nature of the violence, the nature of those attacks, who was involved and why, and what sort of details can you provide on how people were affected, deaths, displacement, injuries? And that's it.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Brooke Abdu. I'm from the Reporter newspaper. My first question is regarding the rule of law in the country. So I wonder what the status of the court case on the assassination of high-level leaders in Amhara and the assassination of the chief of staff of the Ethiopian Defense Force. I think it happened a year ago. And my second question is, the government has been repeatedly criticized for not protecting the citizens from attacks, and many people have been dying over the past years because of violence and protesters. So many say that the government doesn't have the capacity to protect its citizens and ensure peace and security in the country. So what evidence can you provide that the government has that capacity to protect its citizens and ensure peace and security in the country while many are dying at this point in time? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grum Jala CGTN. I would like to ask 2.5 questions. Billene, first on the repatriation effort that you've been talking about. It's been done since the Prime Minister came to office, one of the priority areas of his. But we would like to understand what is going to be next, perhaps in terms of those who are here already and what is being done with them, and those who are also languishing in different countries, perhaps in prisons too. The half question is also for you. On this, the Oromia, Amhara, and Southern Regional States projects, the international community could also take part, such as, for instance, the Chinese government and other investors. What is the call from the government in this regard of participation, investment, and other things, if there is any? Excellency Attorney General, election is coming up. Within this year should be held. As my friend tried to mention it, some of the opposition leaders, perhaps arguably the strong ones, are said to be in prison or are facing trial. What do you think is going to be the shadow effect of such an act while the Prime Minister is promising a free, fair, and peaceful, credible elections coming up? Thank you so much.
Are we working? Yeah, we're working. Simon Marks with Bloomberg. Without repeating some of the questions, I'll try and differentiate. But first one for Billene. Simply, do you think that the upcoming elections can be considered fair and credible if some of the Prime Minister's sort of greatest opponents and critics are in fact in a pre-trial phase or in detention of some sort? And obviously we're talking about people like Jawar Mohammed here. And my second question to His Excellency the Attorney General, could you perhaps go into a bit more detail on some of the evidence that's been brought forward to charge both Bekele Gerba and Jawar Mohammed? Because some of the sort of analysis and critique we hear is that the law, the anti-terror law, for example, that's been used has been often politicized in the past. But perhaps you can just maybe spell out some of the evidence to maybe back up those charges. I'd be interested in knowing. Thank you.
You've given us some figures here concerning the destruction and loss of lives. 160 have died and 360 injured. And what are these a result of? I mean, have there been independent investigation done and everybody across the board agreed on these figures? Or
just kindly, Billene, clarify on the government is changing currency and with motive. So far, how is the government doing? Are you achieving the target or the mission of changing the currency so far? Are we seeing people giving out the money that was alleged, being held from the economy and all that? What's the progress? Are we seeing the money coming out? Thank you.
Okay, I think let's respond to these questions and we can continue. Let me start with Coletta's questions, and just to give a bit of a summary again in terms of the aim of the demonetization scheme. So the introduction of the new currency notes has been done so in a very thoughtful process, putting into account what needs to be put in place to make this successful. Most of the work is aimed to be accomplished within a month, but within a 3-month time frame is when all of the changes for all of the notes has been set to be put in place. These currency notes have been introduced with new security features and also other distinctive elements as well. And one of the key aspects of why that was brought into place and why it was necessary to do so is also as part of the efforts to number one, stabilize the macroeconomic environment, but also to address some of these aspects of illicit financial flows and also some of what can I say, the sources or the financing mechanisms for some of these sporadic incidents that are happening throughout the country as well. So it is aimed to curb these challenges among many other economic challenges as well. But with regards to how the process is ongoing, but the direction that has been given is for the formation of a command post to be set up, which includes security sectors at the federal level, and the regions have also been asked to follow through. So far it's been about 2 weeks since this has been started. The first set of money has been sent to the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, and already these change processes have been taking place. There has been some irregularities that had been noticed with regards to seizure of people carrying certain amounts of money, but the National Bank has also been evaluating and putting a ceiling on what these the limit for these things are. So far the process, as per the National Bank of Ethiopia reports, is that it's going quite smoothly, and I think we'll be able to give much more feedback once the 1 month milestone has been addressed. Moving, and Dr. Gedion will also address it, but moving backwards to some of the questions, I think, Simon, the question that you posed to me, do I believe, it's not only what I believe, but this is a conviction of the federal government, this is a conviction of the Prime Minister as well, that the elections will be free and fair, and there is no mincing any words, there is no confusion that the rule of law proceedings have nothing to do at all with trying to get, as you say, some prominent voices out of it. We are dealing with parties. We have a system, or created a system for multi-parties to play within the rules and the confines of the political playing field. And the rule of law is applicable to anybody, regardless of whether you're in a political party or not. So individuals that do not play within the confines of the space will be held accountable by the rule of law. So this has nothing to do about putting people outside of this. And I think it's important also to recall the background to the opening up of the political space. Again, the elections are not going to be on a personal level, they're on a party basis. So the parties are still active. Individuals in those parties might not be active, but they're some of their key leadership and other members of the parties are also there, so these parties are expected to also participate. So again, there is a strong conviction that they will be free and fair, and this is something that the government has been looking forward to and anticipating, and also not only anticipating, but creating a level playing ground for that as well, with a lot of the political dialogue platforms that had been initiated as well. A lot of the opening up has been part of that, but again, it is within the confines of the rule of law that everybody has to play fair within that space. Going to Groom's question, particularly on the Dine for Ethiopia initiatives, is there a call for the international community? Definitely there is a call for that, for anybody that's willing to invest as well. Part of these projects enable us to see some of the natural endowments that Ethiopia has been sitting on, green gold, if you would say so. So being able to utilize those, to capitalize on those, to be able to bring meaningful changes to these communities is one aspect of it. So any partnerships that would enhance and deliver on this prosperity goal and this ambition of developing these areas is something that is, that is championed. And the call is not only for international investors, but local investors as well. If we look at the experience of how the Endoto Park project was progressing, the government created an enabling condition for private sector involvement by putting in infrastructure, electricity, roads, and water. So this is the same kind of enabling environment that is planned to be created in these 3 different regions, and with the participation of private sector to further enhance the community's engagement, ownership, as well as development out of it as well. So international stakeholders are also invited in that regard. With regards to your question with the repatriation efforts, indeed, the repatriation efforts are not something only new and limited to COVID-19 repatriations, but before that as well. The Prime Minister has been actively engaged in negotiating with different countries to bring back also former prisoners as well that had been imprisoned for various offenses in different countries as well. But also domestic workers who are in grave conditions, whose situations within their host countries are not really supporting their development. As part of the citizen-focused diplomacy, there has been a lot of people that have been returned, but it's not a very simple process as well. It is a cumbersome process, so this work is being done at the consular level with the support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well as partner organizations as well. So the priority focus, particularly in this period, has been given to those that are in dire need of that kind of support, whereas there are other forms of citizen-centered diplomacy work that is being done at the consular and the embassy level, which is supporting these citizens in their host cities and host areas as well. So it's not necessarily only repatriating them back, but making sure that their rights within the places or their host countries are also being effectively addressed. But for those that are wanting to come back as well, facilitating that process, despite the fact that it might be a bit of a cumbersome process. So once they do come here as well, different partner organizations are involved with federal entities to rehabilitate them and also find meaningful and gainful employment for them as well. So this is an ongoing process because, as you know, these issues, there are a lot of migrant workers abroad. And in relation to the complexity of the tasks as well, the task of reintegrating them back into the communities as well and finding them meaningful and livelihoods is an ongoing process. With regards to Robbie's question on Metakal, this is something that happened recently, so investigations are still ongoing as well. Who are behind this? There is some information to indicate that bandits are operating in the area as well, but so far measures have been taken to bring to account over 300 have been apprehended for their involvement, including leadership in the area as well. So with the specific elements, this is as part of an ongoing investigation. This would be coming out to light within the next few weeks, but as far as the preliminary information, this is what I have. I think, Brooke, you had asked a question about the capacity of the government to protect its citizens as well. Again, I want to reiterate that incidents do not necessarily govern, or incidents or pockets of incidents do not necessarily reflect the measure of the government's work to enhance peace and security in a country. And for all the incidents that we're aware of that make it to the media, what does not usually make it to the media is what kind of threats have been thwarted by the collaborative efforts of the security sector. Together with the relevant regions and different federal entities as well. So there have been a lot of cases that have been thwarted, a lot of terrorist activities as well, because of the timely intervention of the security sector that have not made it to media light, but this is also part of the efforts that are being done in ensuring citizens' peace and security. I think these were the ones that were addressed to me, and we proceed to Dr. Gedion.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I'm not really good with names, and I might not have caught your name, so I'll just simply address the questions and the issues. As far as the first question is concerned, the investigations in Oromia have already been completed, and as I've already said, charges are being pressed throughout the week. We expect some charges to be pressed tomorrow, and some maybe early next week. So until that process is completed, it will be difficult to give exact figures as to how many people are are being processed through the judicial system. The current figure we have is above 2,000 suspects are being charged for their participation in the violence that has taken place in the Oromia regional state. And we hope that will give you a more reliable and a more exact figure sometime next week once all the charges have been filed at the courts. With regard to the complaints in relation to the handling of the suspects and the human rights situation, as have already indicated, due to the large size of the number of the suspects, the number of the suspects is high because the nature of the crimes was such that these were riots, these were mob attacks that involved thousands. So given the number of people who have participated in the commission of the crime, the number of people that will be arrested would also naturally be high. So some might characterize it as mass arrest, but it's because there was a mass that participated in the crime, in the commission of the crimes. Yes, there have been shortcomings and some challenge throughout the process from the human rights perspective, but not, I would say that in relative terms they're not major, and to the extent that these kind of issues and challenges cropped up, they were pointed out by various entities, particularly by our own Human Rights Commission, and remedial measures were taken to rectify this situation. Now, as far as the nature of the charge is concerned, yes, some of the suspects, some of the accused complain that they are being charged for their political activity because they criticize the government, or because because of this or that. But I would reiterate the fact that one, there were hundreds of people who have been directly affected by the violence these individuals have instigated and incited. Right? So we have to distinguish between peaceful, lawful political mobilization and the kind of rhetoric, the kind of ultra-nationalist, militant, violent political activism that results in deaths and injury of citizens. There might be a correlation between their political activity and the crimes they have committed, but we have to distinguish between correlation and causation. Some of the suspects, some of the accused are politicians, but they are not being charged for their political activity. They are being charged for their acts, their conduct that has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of citizens. And that's not something we could ignore. That's not something we could put under the rug. This is something that has to be investigated, and people have to be held accountable to the extent of their participation. The people who directly participated in the mob attacks, the individuals, the youngsters, they have to be held accountable. That's true. But those who have organized them, those who have instigated them, those who have incited them also have to be accountable. Whether they are journalists, politicians, it shouldn't matter. As far as coming to the third question, I think it was an update or the status of the trials relating to the assassination of the Chief of Staff and the officials of the Amara regional state. As far as those, as far as the suspect and the perpetrator of the assassination of the Chief of Staff is concerned, the court has already pronounced it, gave its ruling on the guilt of the accused, so we could say that he's a convict. Now, what remains is sentencing, and the case has been adjourned for sentencing, so it's in its final stages. The other case as well is it has progressed and it's in a rather final stages, but not as advanced as the first case I mentioned. We hope and expect that now that new judges have been appointed both at the federal first instance level and at the federal high court, the burden on the judiciary would be in a better position to speed up these cases and sentence them and conclude the proceedings. So that's the update that we could give. But I'd also like to reiterate that since these trials are held in public, the media could also see the proceedings, observe the proceedings, and report on the proceedings. As far as the protection of citizens is concerned, in addition to what my colleague Billene has said, in addition to the thwarted traits, we have also to take into account that the law enforcement efforts we are undertaking are meant to ensure that there will not be impunity, and by bringing an end to a sense of impunity, we are of the opinion that the likelihood of similar attacks being perpetrated in the future would decline. So bringing suspects, bringing those responsible for these crimes to justice is another mechanism for ensuring that this kind of things will not keep occurring again and again. The other question that has been raised was in relation to the use of the anti-terror proclamation, the evidences that the government has. Now, as far as the counterterrorism proclamation is concerned, what I would like to clarify is, first and foremost, in most of the cases that you have in mind, the most serious charge that has been brought against the accused is not even on the basis of the counterterrorism proclamation. It's on the basis of the ordinary criminal code. So many of the high-profile suspects have been accused of violating Article 240 of the Criminal Code, which entails a more serious penalty, which is clearly the more serious offense. As far as the counterterrorism proclamation is concerned, most of the accused are accused for the lesser crime of preparation for terrorist acts. So compared with the charge under Article 240 of the Criminal Code, which relates to inciting and instigating attacks, riots, both against citizens and the government, this is relatively even a less serious offense. So I am, to some extent, I'm a bit perplexed because these are individuals who have been charged for crimes that are far more serious, but the charge that is getting all the attention is the less serious offense. So a closer look at the charge could clarify the situation. Furthermore, due to the legislative reforms that have taken place over the last 2 years, the counterterrorism proclamation we have now offers no tactical or procedural or evidentiary advantage for the prosecution. Previously, the complaints about abuse of the anti-terror proclamation could have been rather justified because compared with the ordinary criminal code, the anti-terror proclamation offered enormous, huge procedural and tactical advantage in terms of how the evidence is weighted, assessed, in terms of pre-trial detention, so forth and so on. But the counterterrorism proclamation that is currently in place offers no such advantage for the the prosecution, and it doesn't put the suspects at any undue disadvantage. So if you ask me, it's not the prosecution that is trying to politicize the proceedings, it's the other way around. Finally, as far as the number of victims and the damage that has been assessed is concerned, these are the numbers that we have arrived at through our investigation process. So far, we have not seen any credible or any credible data that challenge these figures. So, in our view, these are as credible as the figures of victims, fatalities that one could get at this point in time. Thank you.
Unless there's any remaining questions or follow-up questions, we can wrap up. Follow-up question, Simon? Okay. Okay, we'll take a follow-up question with Simon and we'll...
Hi, Billene, can I just ask you, 'cause today was the first session, I believe, of the new Tigray Council, Parliament, whatever you want to call it. What is the government's view on the establishment of this new Parliament up there, considering it was done on the back of an illegal election? Could you just spell that out for us? And very lastly, when will there be a date put on the election? I know it's going to be within 12 months or before the next Ethiopian New Year, but is there a date you could give us, maybe?
Okay, and we'll wrap up with that. The date for the elections is not determined by this office. It's determined by the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia. So once the House of People's Representatives have said yesterday that they've endorsed, or a few days ago have endorsed the Ministry of Health's recommendations. So the next process is for the National Electoral Board to determine their readiness and preparedness and announce that. So we will all await and hear back for that date. With regards to the other question that you asked me, I defer that to the House of Federation because the House of Federation has deemed the elections as null and void. So again, in terms of the new setup that you mentioned, I would defer to the House of Federation as well because we play within the constitutional framework. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.